I hope it's interactive. And, you know, I'm thinking of it as like, I'm here to open a door to a conversation and for us to start that conversation together. And then for you all in your community to continue that conversation with each other, well, beyond me being here. And so I do have a few mini activities that I'm going to walk us through, and we'll get through as much as we can. But before we get into that, I want to introduce myself a little more. You know, I am a teacher, I am a PhD student, but I'm much more than that. And for those of you who may have sat down in a talk with me before or been to something else that I've presented at Queen's, you may have seen this picture before, but for those who may not recognize it, this is a Sampaguita flower, which is, oh, I meant to actually have the latest bloom that fell off of our plant in my hands today, but it's okay, never mind. So I am from the Philippines. I am a second generation immigrant here, first of my family born in Canada. Literally like 10 months after my family arrived, I was born. But in many ways, the Philippines is home for me. And I love sharing this picture of this flower because for me, it's become quite an important symbol that grounds me and helps me understand who I am, who I am, and the work I do, and the importance of thinking of myself in relationship with other people. And why it's such an important symbol for me is because, you know, not only is it the national flower of the Philippines, but in many ways, it's a reminder that my family and I are not indigenous to this land. The little Sampaguita plant we have in our kitchen would not survive outside. Even in the summer, I don't think it would survive. It has to stay inside. And even though it has moments of blooming and flourishing, it also struggles a little bit because it's not used to the climate here, even when it is indoors. And so, you know, in that way, my plant, like our Sampaguita plant, reminds me like, oh, you know, in me being an other, and me being an immigrant, a second generation immigrant, and me being a woman of color, there are many ways in which I face challenges in Canada, many ways in which I need to think about how I can protect my community, protect my family, and other BIPoC folks like me. But, you know, on the same hand, it also reminds me, like, we are not indigenous to this land. We are a guest to this land. And so I do also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I am on the treaty lands and traditional, or the treaty territories and traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. For years and years and years, this land has been home to the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwa, Chippewa. It's also been home to the Métis. And sorry, one second. I want to make sure I don't forget anyone in my land acknowledgement, but I just need one moment. Okay. So yeah, so the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron, Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwa, Chippewa, and it's also been this land has also been home to the Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are the direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credits. So I apologize for not being more prepared and having that more familiar, but more ingrained in my memory. But this is an opportunity for you to also think about the land that you're on, and if you are a settler on this land, what it means to be a guest, and what it means to stand in solidarity with Indigenous folks who are home, for whom this is home. I also wanted to talk a little bit about accountable spaces, because we are talking about racism today. Racism is a very uncomfortable topic. It has a lot of emotions attached to it. And I have found that it helps to set a ground rule of understanding that we are all approaching this discussion with the intent to be accountable to each other. And I like to define accountable spaces at the beginning of these talks, just so that everyone knows the places in which they can be secured, and the places in which they're going to be called to care for each other as well as care for yourselves. And so to be accountable means being responsible to yourself and others. It's understanding that our discomfort will happen, but are also moments for learning. It's addressing if we say something harmful or oppressive, even if not intended. It's being aware of how much space we're taking up. So it also means, you know, sharing airtime. And so if you see other people are wanting to contribute, maybe limiting how much or what you say. And it's also listening with an open and humble heart. And so with the intention to learn and to understand that even if these moments are uncomfortable, that, that we work through it together, we work through it, we move past it, and we keep on trying to build our learning and make ourselves more, and yeah, basically just make ourselves more accountable. Okay, so I want to do an activity, and this is the Mentimeter activity. Patricia, I did a version of this with you at SGS 902, and I flipped it a little because I want to get a baseline of how everyone is thinking and feeling about racism. And so in a minute in the chat, I'm going to put a link, and that link is going to prompt you to provide 3 words for how you define racism, and or how you would describe racism. And from that, I'm going to pull up a word cloud that will generate all of our words together. And we're going to be able to trace some patterns and see how we're all orienting ourselves to this conversation. So if you have a window open and you want to go to menti.com, you can input that code, but I also like to provide a link so that, whoops. Actually, one moment. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen because I think that's going to be easier. Okay, so this link that I just put in the chat is where you can input your 3 words. And at the same time, I am going to share my screen again so that we can watch it sort of happen in real time. All right, so some of the answers we have so far talk about violence and oppression, power. And what you're going to see is the words that start getting larger and larger are the ones that we're repeating or have been entered multiple times. And the ones that are going to be around the border are the ones that are a little more unique. And so right now, the words that are in the middle are inequity and barriers. And some of the words around the border are things like prejudice, belief, overt and covert, which is something we're going to be talking about later. Oppressive and oppression are close together there and are also smaller. Unfair, violence, color, privilege. But a few of you have entered inequity and barriers, which is why that's showing up as larger. And I think there's around like 16 of us here, so I'll let this go for a while longer. So I want to thank you all for contributing to this conversation. The reason why I wanted to start off our conversation with this word cloud is because I wanted everyone here to experience how we are all coming into this conversation about racism with different levels of knowledge, first of all, but also different lived experiences. We are quite a diverse group here. I didn't get the chance to read really closely through the chat, but even just in virtue of us being humans, I know that we're all like, this is already a very diverse group in that we all have very different experiences. But I also know that some of us here are white, some of us are people of color, some of us may be indigenous, Black, and all of those factors, all of those impacts on our personal sort of experiences are what affect how we experience, describe, define racism. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the diversity in the room, because it means that some of us are going to be experiencing this conversation differently. And it's really, I have found, can be very difficult to talk about racism with different groups when the learning goals of everyone here are going to be so vastly different. And so that's not to say that I don't think that we can have a very wonderful, productive, and enriching conversation today. It's just another reminder that I want us to hold, to understand that there are limitations to our own perspectives, and that's okay. And this is where that last rule of accountable spaces that I mentioned in my last slide of listening with an open and humble heart really comes into play, and understanding that there are going to be people here talking about something you've never experienced. And that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for learning. So I want to thank you all for contributing to this word cloud. I see a couple of other words have sort of grown as I was talking, unfair being one of them, power and discrimination being other, all great and wonderful contributions. I thank you so much. But I'm going to flip back over to my presentation. And so another reason why I wanted to start with the definition activity is because I wanted all of us to get our like emotions and thoughts and our brain messes out onto the screen before I lay sort of the foundation of how I will be talking about racism today. And in all of the work that I do, it's really important that I always connect it back to this idea of institutional racism. And some of you may be familiar with this term, but if you're not, that's completely okay. But I did throw up this really quick and easy and straightforward definition, just so that we all have some kind of similar foundation as we move forward. And so I work with the definition of institutional or systemic racism, which I found this really great, really quick article from The Conversation that has a nice definition. And it's basically, it refers to how ideas of white superiority are captured in everyday thinking at a systems level. So taking in the big picture of how society operates rather than looking at one-on-one interactions. These systems can include laws and regulations, but also unquestioned social systems. Systemic racism can stem from education, hiring practices, or access. And you'll notice that in this definition, I've highlighted one particular part, which is that ideas of how white superiority are captured in everyday thinking at a systems level. And so for me, it is really important to say that when we are talking about racism, we are also talking about white superiority. We're talking about the patterns in society that make it so that whiteness is privileged and everything that is not whiteness is not privileged. And of course, it's more complicated than that. You know, I know, like especially myself, who is a PhD student looking at anti-racist education, that there are many, many nuances. But what I want us to move forward with understanding is that this is not necessarily about one-on-one interactions that could be understood as being filled with prejudice or bias, but this is about white superiority and the ways in which white superiority are perpetuated, solidified, and sort of repeated in the ways in which institutions and society are set up. And so I want to do another reflective activity, and this is going to be a free write. So what I'd love for you to do is to find a piece of paper, or if you don't have a piece of paper, to pull up a document on your laptop, or even if you have your phone, if you want to open a notes app or just something where you can record your thoughts. This does not have to be pretty at all. And what I'm going to ask for you to do is to spend 2 minutes doing a free write. And a free write is basically when you write without stopping for 2 minutes straight, and I will keep track of time. And what I don't want you to do is worry about grammar or spelling or being even like linear with your thinking. Your job is to just get all your thoughts out of your head. And what I want you to write about in this free write is to talk about where have you seen or experienced racism at Queen's? And remember that we're talking about, you know, when we're talking about racism, we're talking about white superiority. So where have you seen white superiority at Queen's? And this could be covert, which means more subliminal, more sort of like under the surface, or it could be overt, which is more direct. It could be, and it can be about the patterns in our institutions, in our system. It can be on campus, off campus, in lectures, in meetings, in labs or tutorials for those of you who facilitate those, in your social spaces connected to Queen's, in your committee work, in even just like things that you would have to do for research protocols or processes, etc. Basically, I want you to go with your gut. And I am very big on listening to our bodies when our bodies are trying to tell us something. And so when you think about racism at Queen's, what is your gut and your heart pulling you towards? And that is what I would love for you to write about. So I will leave this screen up so that you have a prompt, but I'm going to set my timer now. And I will give you 2 minutes to write. So everyone shake out your body, have a deep breath and start writing now. Right, so we've reached 2 minutes, but I want to give you a few seconds to finish your thoughts. Make sure that you get all of your brain stuff, your brain ideas out on the paper. And while you were writing, I had the chance to catch up on the chat, and I just want to say I'm so appreciative of all the brilliance that is in the room right now and all the wonderful work that you all bring to Queen's, and I feel really humbled to be here. So I'm glad that I also had a quiet moment to get to know you all individual. And I also want to acknowledge that Leda, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name, in response to the prompt of what just to describe racism, very importantly, mentioned George Floyd, police terror, extreme unfairness. And I also want to acknowledge that recently was the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, and is a very, very difficult time specifically for the Black folks in our community. And I wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that. So thank you so much for mentioning it in the chat. I know that, sorry, phone's ringing. I know that can be a very intense experience doing that free write. And I want to give everyone the chance to share if they want to what you wrote about. But the way that I'm going to ask you to do it, I'm gonna give you a couple of different ways to do this. And the first is through an anonymous. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I've set up a Padlet, which for those of you who don't know is like a, there are a few different ways that we can share over Padlet, and I've chosen a sort of graffiti style mode where we can just write anonymously some of the ideas that we had from this free write. And the Padlet title that I've given this is just basically, where have you seen or experienced racism at Queens? And here's the link to the Padlet. And what you can do is go visit the link that I just put in the chat, and you will have the opportunity to add, if you want to, if you're comfortable, something about what you just wrote in your free write. And to give you an idea of how much or as little as you want to contribute, the contribution that I made to the Padlet before we started was, my example of racism at Queens is committee work. When BIPoC faculty, staff, and students are asked and expected to sit on EDI-related committees, in a disproportionate amount versus their peers at Queens. And so I'm going to give everyone the chance to add their contributions there. And then after a little while, I'm going to ask that we read it together. And as you're writing, I'm actually going to prompt you to sort of see what your colleagues are writing and take note, like what surprises you in what's being asked, what is familiar or hits close to home, and what is something that you didn't know about or would like to know more about. And so I'm going to give you the chance to both write and share, and then also read what others are writing and sharing. All right, so it's been a lot of me talking, but now I'd love to open it up to all of you. I think some of you have figured out that there is a thumbs up, thumbs down sort of a way of supporting people in the Padlet. So if you see something and it resonates with you, you can give a thumbs up. And I actually find that to be quite a lovely way to tell folks, even though this is an anonymous activity, that we see you, we understand you, and we hear you. But I would love to chat about this experience of sharing and how it was for you, of things that you read that were surprising or very familiar, or even if there was something that you wanted to raise with the group in terms of racism at Queens. So I just wanted to open it up to the floor and see, and have anyone who wants to start the discussion, please feel free to. And you can raise your hand or you can just jump in. I feel like our group is small enough that if it gets a little bit confusing, then I'll ask you to do the under reaction, the raise hand feature. Sorry, but I wanted to also just say thank you all for participating. Patricia has my email address. I'll share all the resources I went through today, and I'm always happy to chat further.
Thank you, Clarissa. Thank you, everybody, and you have a nice day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.